Houston, Texas. A windy evening swept across the city as Natasha Green walked slowly down the street, her mind replaying the events of the past few days. She remembered the moment Officer Brandon Tate had first ordered her arrest, his arrogance, his contempt. But in the end, the truth had prevailed, and no badge could shield injustice. Earlier that afternoon, Natasha drove her sleek black SUV through a quiet residential neighborhood. As the newly appointed director of state law enforcement, she had chosen to observe local police operations firsthand. Foregoing her usual professional attire, she wore jeans, a simple blouse, and sneakers to blend in and remain anonymous. But as she turned down a side street, flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror, followed by a sharp chirp of the siren. Natasha sighed, pulling over to the curb and rolling down her window. A tall officer with closely cropped blonde hair stepped out of the cruiser. The nameplate on his uniform read B. Tate. He approached with rigid authority, a man intoxicated by the power of his position. License and registration, he said curtly. Natasha met his eyes calmly. May I ask what I did wrong, officer? Tate's smirk was laced with disdain. Suspicious behavior. I have a right to check. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. This wasn't her first encounter with racial profiling, but she remained composed. Carefully, she retrieved her documents and handed them over. Tate glanced at them and arched an eyebrow. Nice car. How'd you afford it? Instead of answering, Natasha asked evenly, Am I free to go now? Rather than responding, Tate abruptly opened her door. Step out. I need to search the vehicle. Natasha's patience was tested. You have no probable cause. That's illegal. Refusal to cooperate is obstruction, he barked. Knowing the dangers of escalation, she chose compliance. She stepped out, standing tall and dignified. Tate rifled through her SUV with no gloves, no procedure, just blind entitlement. What are you doing in this area? He asked coldly. Am I obligated to answer that? He sneered and returned to his patrol car. Check this vehicle's registration. He barked into the radio. Moments later, he returned, mockingly surprised. Well, it's registered to you. What kind of woman like you owns a ride like this? Natasha held her ground. Is that a crime? You're being difficult, Tate accused, moving closer, his stance aggressive. What do you do for a living? I work in law, she replied evenly. He chuckled mockingly. What a clerk! She remained silent, her fury simmering beneath a composed exterior. Suddenly, Tate demanded Herbeck. I need to check for illegal substances. No, not without a warrant. His eyes narrowed. You're refusing a police order? I'm refusing an illegal one. His jaw clenched. Then, without warning, he grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. You're under arrest for obstruction. Natasha gritted her teeth against the pain as onlookers began to gather. A woman in the crowd shouted, What did she do wrong? Another man, recording on his phone, added he didn't even read her rights. Tate ignored them, shoving Natasha into the patrol car. A young officer nearby looked unsettled. Was that necessary, Officer Tate? Asked Officer Daniel Cole, a 2-year rookie. Tate sneered. You want to be a real cop, or just another bleeding heart? Daniel looked down, uncertain. As the car sped through the streets, Natasha stared silently out the window, planning her next steps. Tate smirked in the mirror. You're going to love our jail. At the station, Lieutenant Miguel Alvarez raised an eyebrow as Tate marched Natasha in. What's the charge? Resisting a lawful order, Tate replied. Daniel hesitated, then added, It didn't feel lawful. Before Alvarez could respond, a commanding voice cut through the room. Hold it. All eyes turned to a silver-haired man in plain clothes, Deputy Commissioner Robert Maddox. Who gave you authority to make arrests without probable cause? Tate bristled. Sir, I was doing my job. Maddox turned to Natasha. Your name, ma'am? She smiled. Natasha Green. The room went still. Officers exchanged glances. Alvarez stiffened. Daniel's mouth fell open. Maddox's voice was steel. Remove her cuffs. Now. A female officer rushed forward. Tate gaped in disbelief. She's the director of state law enforcement, Maddox said flatly. You just arrested your boss. Tate backed away. That can't be. Natasha stepped forward. What was the real reason you stopped me, Officer Tate? He stammered, unable to answer. You're suspended, Maddox declared. Pending an investigation. Tate's face flushed red. This was a setup. You walked into it yourself, Natasha replied coldly. Alvarez placed a firm hand on Tate's shoulder. Let's go. As officers let him out, Maddox turned to Natasha. I apologize, Director Green. She nodded. I don't want apologies. I want reform. She turned to Officer Cole. You're young. Decide now what kind of officer you want to be. He nodded solemnly. Within days, the video footage had gone viral. National news covered the story. Tate faced public outrage. Internal Affairs launched an emergency hearing. In the conference room, Natasha sat across from Tate, joined by Maddox and Alvarez. This file, Maddox said, sliding a thick folder across the table, documents years of misconduct. Tate looked overwhelmed. I never meant harm. I didn't know who she was. And if she were just a citizen? Natasha asked. Would she have been jailed? Injured? Killed? Tate said nothing. You have two options, Maddox added. Resign or face criminal charges. Tate stood up, livid. I'll resign, but I won't be silenced. Say what you want, Natasha replied. The truth stands. 3 months later, Natasha chaired a strategic meeting at the state law enforcement headquarters. Charts revealed systemic issues. Over 500 complaints in 5 years, less than 5% properly addressed. This is unacceptable, she said. We need change. Houston Police Chief Richard Bowen pushed back. It's not so simple. This system's been in place for decades. And how many more decades will we tolerate injustice? She shot back. FBI liaison Jonathan Reed spoke up. What do you propose? An independent oversight commission, Natasha declared. Mandatory training on bias. Rigorous hiring standards. Some nodded. Others frowned. Bowen sighed. Not everyone will agree. Then they're the problem, she replied. Reed smiled. We want to work with you. A few days later, a press conference was held. Natasha stood at the podium. Today we launched the Independent Police Oversight Commission, she announced. We will ensure fairness and transparency for every citizen. When a reporter asked if it would really make a difference, Natasha looked into the camera. If we don't try, we'll never know. But I promise this. I will not stop until justice is served. Applause erupted. Natasha knew this was just the beginning. But a foundation had been laid, and she would keep building. Thank you for being here. If this story moved you, please click like and subscribe. A new powerful story awaits tomorrow.